Blog Talk Radio.
Welcome to our program on Kardec Radio. And now, here's our host, Dr. Vanessa Anceloni.
Welcome, dear listener, to Kardec Radio. Today is a beautiful day because we're going to talk about God and our brains. And we have here an expert and also the leading scientist in the field, Dr. Andrew Newberg. He's back at Kardec Radio, and we are more than honored to have him here. He has recently published more books, and books that will transform your life, like How God Changes Your Brain, and many others. We have a lot to talk to him and learn from him. As he says in his website, andrewnewberg.com, he asks this question: what is the nature of reality? How do we understand it? This is the leading question of his research. Dr. Andrew Newberg is a neuroscientist who studies the relationship between brain function and various mental states. He is a pioneer in the neurological study of religious and spiritual experiences, a field that he coined the term neurotheology. And actually, he wrote a book, Principles of Neurotheology, which we actually discussed in a previous program. His research includes taking brain scans of people in prayer, meditation, rituals, and trance states in an attempt to better understand the nature of religious and spiritual practices and attitudes. Go to his website. It's a great, very comprehensive, andrewnewberg.com. He is currently professor and director of research at the Integrative Medicine of Thomas Jefferson University and Hospital. And, of course, if you want to read his book, one of the main books we're going to discuss, How God Changes Your Brain, you can buy currently at Amazon.com, Barnes & Noble, anywhere and elsewhere. It's quite interesting. We're going to discuss a lot on how these spiritual and religious practices can actually change our lives. How so? Well, only the expert can tell us. But before we begin, we'd like to share with you that Divaldo Franco, for those who are in Europe, is in Europe. He's in Europe in a tour of 35 days, and you can go to the spiritistmagazine.com where you're going to find his very itinerary. It's just beautiful, dear listener. Opportunities in every country. It's actually 12 countries he's going to visit in 35 days, and he's going to give talks everywhere and elsewhere. And as we're talking about the Spiritist Magazine, go to our website, thespiritistmagazine.com. We have just released the latest issue of the magazine. It talks about spiritual healing. It talks about the latest findings on science, on our different types of intelligences and spirituality. And it's dedicated, this very issue is dedicated mostly to the first steps of Spiritism in the United States. And you can read more about the greatest medium of all times, Chico Xavier, and his visits to the United States, and especially the visits to the Haddad family in North Carolina at Allen College. And the daughter of the Haddads, Edwina Haddad, recently shared with us lots of materials about the correspondence between Chico Xavier and them, and we can learn a lot from it. And we published a few of those important historic pieces for you on the Spiritist Magazine. Just go to thespiritistmagazine.com, and we'll be very happy to share with you, because the magazine is also free of charge. Can you believe it? Yeah, I think it's unbelievable too, but that's how the nature of things are in Spiritism. Everything is for you to nourish your soul, like Kardec Radio. One more thing before we open the line to talk about the very topic today. Dr. Emma Bragdon, she recently mailed me and asking to share with you, dear listener, her interesting program for health providers. She is organizing This is not the first time, but she's organizing again a trip for healthcare providers to explore Spiritist psychiatric hospital and clinics in Brazil. And it's going to happen between October 5th and the 12th of 2014, this very year. And in her website, emmabragdon.com, she has a tab on Brazil trips for health professionals. It's quite interesting. And we are vouching for it because we think her proposal is very important. We need to change the way our healthcare system, especially the mental healthcare system, is treating patients in the United States. It's very limited. The neuropharmacology, unfortunately, is very limited in taking care of the different problems in mental health. And in Brazil, amazing to say this, though it's not as advanced scientifically as the United States, say Brazil is at the forefront of mental health care. Why? Because of Spiritism. Nowadays, most of healthcare, the hospitals, the psychiatric hospitals in Brazil are taken care by Spiritist directors who are also physicians and or healthcare providers in general, and they combine treatments. It's a complementary care. So they offer the spiritual care plus the traditional medical care, and they are seeing great success with it. No matter how we can explain it scientifically, things are happening, and there's no side effect. Of course, by saying a prayer, what side effect can you cause on a patient? You can't. So why not really adding those elements? And Brazil is really at the forefront of that type of approach. Dr. Bragdon is inviting those interested in the opportunity to come with her to Brazil, learn how it happens, and maybe make it happen in the United States. Just go to her website, emmabragdon.com, and you'll get to know more about the information. Before we begin to talk about how God changes your brain, the principles of neurotheology, and much more, why we believe what we believe, as written by Dr. Newberg, we are going to give a very short break. When we come back, Dr. Newberg is here with us.
Chapter 17, Always in Peace.
The violence that alarms mankind and bewilders the whole planet springs from the hidden aggressiveness within the hearts of people. It generates both instability and unhappiness. Any display of evil produces unexpected reactions that may lead to hopelessness and belligerence. Jesus advised, "Watch and pray that ye enter not into temptation." It was a warning to remind us to keep a balanced attitude and attend to our duties. Whatever the circumstances you might be struggling against, keep your peace. Be stern, but avoid rudeness. Enforce discipline, but avert violence. Promote education, but oppose aggressiveness. Whatever you do, do it peacefully. When mistreated or suffering, hold your peace at all costs so that you may keep your tranquility. Jesus was always calm, ineffable, and serene, regardless of circumstances around him. Real peace is rooted in absolute confidence in God. Remain undisturbed, do all the good you can, and do not line up with those who complain, are violent, or unreasonable. Your peace reveals your life as much as the way you live affects the environment around you.
We will return to our program after these messages.
Getting to the Light, Spiritist Therapy for Discarnate Spirits is a small book that offers guidance to Spiritist practitioners and Spiritist counselors. Purchase your copy at www.ssbaltimore.org.
Nourish your soul with Kardec Radio.
If you missed out on any previous shows, no worries. We have an on-demand section of all previous shows and interviews. Go to our website at www.kardecradio.com.
Spread the word. Kardec Radio, to learn more about Spiritism.
Help prevent suicide by reading and sharing these books with others. 2 great books are available to help in this Kardec Radio campaign to prevent suicide. Suicide, All You Need to Know, by the international Spiritist speaker Richard Simonetti. You can buy your copy at www.roundtablepublishing-uk.com. Also, Memoirs of a Suicide by the medium Yvonne Pereda. Buy your copy today at www.ediceiofamerica.com.
Kardec Radio, live every Saturday at 11 a.m.
Kardec Radio now offers more programs during the week and weekends. Every Wednesday at 5 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, you can follow the beautiful program God at Home with Francisca Kranz and the British Spiritist community. They will brighten your days by doing a God at Home meeting wherever you are in the world, while teaching you how to do the same in your own home with your family and friends. Every Thursday at 7:30 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, you will hear incredibly inspirational Spiritist talks directly broadcasted by Spiritist Network. There will be true educational moments to carry out to immortality. Every Saturday, live interviews, Bridging Health and Spiritism with the host Dr. Vanessa Anceloni. You may ask questions to the interviewed guests by calling 858-769-4705. And every Sunday, tune in to Spiritist Awareness at Kardec Radio. You will hear a series of segments on a diversity of Spiritist topics. Kardec will broadcast the Spiritist Moment with Kirsten DeMello, the reading of the Spiritist book by John DeRosa and Steve Shepard, Spiritism in Your Life with Drs. Marco and Joyce Magalhães, Spiritism and the Gospel with Luis Sergio Marotta, Spiritist Education for Youth and Children with Bernadette Leal, Spiritist Music with James Marotta, Neuroscience and Spiritism with Dr. Vanessa Anceloni, and many more segments coming soon. Enjoy it all and nourish your soul with Kardec Radio.
And now we return to our program.
We are here, dear listener, today to talk about how we understand reality. Yes, we have the expert in the field, Dr. Andrew Newberg, who is the professor and director of research, Marna Brine Center of Integral Medicine at Thomas Jefferson University and Hospital. He's a great collaborator of Spiritist friends also in Brazil, like Dr. Julio Perez, and he's good friends with us at Kardec Radio. He's back with us to teach us more and more, and we are truly, truly honored. Thank you so much, Dr. Newberg, for being with us once again.
Thank you for having me on your program.
Dr. Newberg, it's amazing. You have new books, and amongst them, we'd like to talk about how God changes your brain, breakthrough findings from a leading neuroscientist. What happened? You were doing research on how the brain was being activated by meditation, prayer, speaking in tongues, and even psychography. You came to another program here where you talked about these things. So since then, what happened that you found out that there are some more things that you found out that are happening to us when we think of God?
Well, it's all been part of an ongoing program of study that I've been engaged in over the last 20 years, really, looking at how our brain relates to our religious and spiritual selves. And to me, it's just this incredibly exciting time, and it's a great area of research that's really just beginning in many ways. And I think you had mentioned the term neurotheology is a term that gets thrown about, but it's really looking at what the intersection is between our brain and our spiritual selves, how they relate to each other, how they affect each other. And, I certainly look at this as a very mutual kind of interaction, that it's not just science telling us about something spiritual, it's not just something spiritual telling us about science or the physical world, but it's the two of them working together to try to get at a better sense of what our reality actually is. As you mentioned, that to me has always been the key question that has been driving me. And so, we've been continuing to do our research studies looking at a variety of different practices like meditation and prayer, and you had mentioned speaking in tongues and psychography, all of which tell us something about the nature of these practices and also about the nature of the human brain. And we continue to explore this information. We've been working on actually on a very fascinating survey that we had been running online for the last 4 or 5 years, and we're now starting to analyze the data on this. But it's a survey of people's spiritual experiences and what they're like and how they affect people, and we're trying to it's a huge treasure trove of data that is we're going through now to understand the subjective elements of these experiences and how they may ultimately relate back to the brain, whether it's emotions or thoughts or feelings or experiences. So there's just so much for us to do, and obviously I'm be looking forward to talking about all these different things today and in the future.
That's wonderful. Now, nowadays, more and more we hear about the importance of meditating. And though many people find it tricky in their busy lives to accommodate meditation, so what can you tell us about the good effects of meditation on our health? And, if you could also tell us about what kind of meditation, or if there is not a specific type that would be beneficial.
Well, you raise a lot of very important points. One of the first thing that you said, I think, is a really important point to address with the listeners, which is that, meditation, we do tend to think about meditation as this thing that is going to take us hours of our lives for years to really have an impact. And the data really point to just the opposite, that meditation practices or meditation-like practices can be as brief as 30 seconds or a minute and still cause some kind of effect on the brain. Now, that's not going to give you a mystical experience in 30 seconds, but you can see a beneficial effect in terms of how you respond to reality, how you respond to the various stressors in your life. And, I tell people all the time, look, you don't have to spend an hour a day meditating, but when you're at your office, when you're at your desk, just take 30 seconds or a minute and focus on your breathing just for that period of time, just breathing in and out very slowly, focusing on whatever thoughts arise in your mind. That's a meditation. That can be done so simply and so easily. If you're a religious individual, do a brief prayer, do the rosary, do some prayer that you like, and just do that at your desk. You can do it in silence, you can do it out loud or in a whisper, depending on what you're able to do. And all of these approaches can be very effective. And we in fact, one of the studies that we published a couple of years ago showed that a practice called Kirtan Kriya meditation, which is a kind of a mantra-based practice. You have to repeat certain phrases over and over. If you do this practice for 12 minutes a day, we see substantial changes in the brain. We see substantial changes in memory and different emotional responses. And this is for 12 minutes a day. So again, it's not very much, and it doesn't take somebody really a lot of time or even effort to be able to do these kinds of simple practices. Now, ultimately, if people have the time and can engage those practices more deeply, then they will have bigger consequences, and they will really shape and change the way you believe and shape and change your life. But that doesn't mean that doing them briefly is without benefit. And as to your other larger, I'm sorry, go ahead.
So just a minor quote unquote question in between this. What do you think is happening mechanistically in the body while a person is doing meditation for us to have such beneficial effects?
Well, it looks like there's a variety of different changes. Of course, my research starts in the brain, and we see a lot of different changes going on in the brain when people do these kinds of meditation practices. The changes are somewhat specific, meaning that each meditation practice or each different type of meditation practice will do something slightly different to your brain and your body, but there's also a lot of overlap and a lot of similarities. People tend to divide meditation into a few basic types, and one type is a concentration type of meditation where you're focusing on something. You're focusing on an object, a phrase, an idea, an object like a candle or something like that. And when you do this, a couple of things start to happen in the brain to begin with. So when you concentrate, you tend to activate your frontal lobes. The frontal lobes, which are right behind your forehead, turn on when you concentrate on anything. So if you start concentrating on an object or a sacred image or something like that, then you're going to have some increased activity in your frontal lobes. Now, the frontal lobes regulate other areas of the brain, and they regulate your emotional systems. In fact, for the most part, the frontal lobes help to kind of calm down your emotional responses. And that's why meditation practices work so well to reduce stress and anxiety and even depression, because those are usually kind of heightened states of activity in the brain, particularly anxiety or stress. You know, our brain gets very overreactive. I'm sure all of us have been there, when we start to worry or start to really key in on one particular stressor in our life. Activating the frontal lobe helps to suppress that activity in the emotional areas of our brain. Now, ultimately, the emotional areas of our brain are connected to a very central structure called the hypothalamus that connects to the rest of the body. And when you do all of this, then not only are you experiencing this change that's going on in the brain, but you change the way the body is responding. And typically studies have shown that you lower your blood pressure, you lower your heart rate, you reduce the amount of a hormone called cortisol, which is your main stress hormone. And all of these things have beneficial effects on the body because obviously if you have high blood pressure or fast heart rates or too much cortisol, then your body doesn't respond well, and it puts you at increased risk for things like heart disease, stroke. So by doing these practices, you tend to help to improve the way your body functions, and there's even evidence now that all of this actually has an impact on the way your immune system functions, so that it appears to be functioning more actively in a better way. And it may actually have an impact even at the genetic level in terms of how your genes and how your chromosomes are protected, so that it actually may have some ability to kind of stave off some of the effects of the aging process. But, of course, whether that ultimately makes you live longer, we don't fully know that yet, but that's kind of where we're headed, at least in terms of the direction of these types of findings.
That's amazing. And you also mentioned in the book, according to these studies, that by doing prayer, I mean, would you say that prayer and meditation fall in the same category in terms of changing the brain to the positive?
Yeah. As a general statement, yes. They're obviously slightly different in terms of what areas of the brain they engage, and prayer is often a more verbal process, so you tend to activate some of the language areas of the brain instead of some of the more experiential or visual areas. But prayer certainly there are meditative forms of prayer, and the more you engage in different rituals related to prayer, they can have very dramatic effects on the brain itself. In fact, sometimes prayer may actually be able to change your brain more because it comes from a spiritual belief system that you hold very strongly. Well, one of the things that we know about the brain is that the more it engages a particular idea, the stronger it feels about an idea, the more the brain gets activated. So, if you're just doing a meditation because somebody told you, hey, this might be a good meditation and you should try it, well, you're not going to have nearly the same kind of an experience as you would if you were doing a prayer that you feel very deeply about and you very strongly believe in. So prayer and meditation certainly have a lot of overlap. Both of them appear to have beneficial effects. We did a study on the rosary, for example, which showed that it has a very good effect at reducing anxiety for people who like doing the rosary, obviously. And so you can see that kind of response. Now, one caveat to all of this is that if you're engaged in any practice that is not consistent with the way in which you believe or the way in which you feel about the world, then that's not going to be helpful. And, I mean, obviously, I would never go to an atheist and say, hey, you know what, the rosary reduces anxiety, you should do the rosary. That doesn't really make sense. But if they can find a more secular-based meditation that they agree with or like or kind of resonates with who they are, then that can be something that can be very valuable to them. And so you don't even have to be a specifically religious or spiritual person, but when you are and you engage in a practice that you care about, then that can be very powerful.
So that means, according to what you just said, if somebody doesn't believe in a prayer and they are undergoing depression, there is no, you can mention to them, well, if you pray, you may feel better, but if they don't believe it, it's not going to work. Is that right?
Well, yes. Again, to pick up on what you said, if you have somebody with depression, you want to find a practice that works well for them and is consistent with their belief system. In fact, you can make them worse if you say, hey, you should do this meditation or prayer, and they don't like it or they get frustrated with it or whatever. That can actually make people feel worse. So, but certainly if they have a practice that they like or if they have a belief system that is a very important one for them, helping them to re-engage that can be very valuable. And people have actually, in the psychology realm, have actually spent a lot of time trying to integrate the more traditional elements of psychotherapy and cognitive behavioral therapy with religious or spiritual ideas so that they can actually kind of bring both of those elements together inside of a person. Because a lot of times when somebody's depressed, they will have alterations in their religious or spiritual ideas, or maybe they'll think God is trying to punish them or something like that. So if you can kind of work on the spiritual beliefs that a person has as well as the psychological elements, that can be a very, very useful and very effective technique. And studies have actually shown that may be as effective, if not more effective, than doing just kind of standard psychotherapy. So yes, there's no question that if you can engage these kinds of practices and do it in a way that really works for you, then it's something that can be very effective.
Now you talk about something that is quite crucial, the way our values and the way we perceive reality. So, for example, one of the things that I've read you found out in this survey, the research on the survey, is that people, for example, who are fundamentalists, they experience the benefits of their practice, but those extreme behaviors related to it, which is anger and prejudice, really can damage the brain. Can you tell us more about that, please?
Well, I think this comes back to, again, kind of a larger picture question, which is what exactly are people believing in or doing as they engage their religious or spiritual beliefs. So if a person is engaged in a kind of belief system which espouses a lot of love and compassion and looking at kind of a oneness or a unity of people, of humankind, then typically you increase the compassion in that person's brain. But as you were pointing out, if you are engaged in a practice or a program where the emotions are more negative, where there's discussions about anger and fear and hating people who don't agree with you or don't see things the same way, then that fosters that negative side. It fosters feelings of anger and fear and hatred. One of the things that we know about the brain is this kind of little cute phrase that neurons that fire together wire together. And what that basically means is that the more you activate certain connections, the more you activate certain beliefs, the stronger those ideas and connections become in the brain. So if you go to somebody and you continue to focus on compassion and love and forgiveness, then those are the neural connections that actually form and then strengthen in the brain so that the person inside feels this and externally expresses these feelings of compassion, love, empathy, and so forth. And as I was mentioning a few minutes ago, if you get somebody into a very angered, hateful kind of state, and you continue to go back to that type of negative behavior and negative emotions, then those are the neural connections that get stronger and stronger, and that's what ultimately winds up being a person who has a lot of negativity and a lot of hate. And obviously there's a balance that needs to be struck. I mean, it doesn't mean that all negativity is bad, and it doesn't mean that all positivity is good. But in fact, sometimes people who have negativity are more realistic, and sometimes people who are very, who have too strong of a positive outlook on things sometimes are not realistic enough, and they can get into trouble that way. So there's ultimately a balance, and our brain usually tries to balance that out fairly well. But overall, I think it's certainly one would want to avoid extended and expensive negative types of ideas and behaviors, so that a person can wind up activating the areas of their brain and using the areas of the brain that foster that compassionate side.
So in other words, you're telling us that these practices can lead us into a different emotional experience, and these emotions can change the way our physiology works. So you're talking about how these spiritual practices can have an impact on our emotional lives, right?
Oh, absolutely, and that's certainly a very key element. Of course, exactly how and why, depends on each individual type of practice or each type of belief system. But we obviously have a very, very rich emotional repertoire that we have available to us, and most religious traditions play on a lot of those different emotions. Hopefully, most of them are more positive, but there are times where, obviously there are people who become very religious and become enormously compassionate and loving and helpful to other people, and then there's people who become very religious and are willing to strap a bomb around their chest and kill people who don't believe exactly the way they do. So, there's no question that that the rituals, that the beliefs, that the practices can evoke very, very strong emotional responses in people. The question, of course, is what kind are they going to be, and are you going to fall into an approach and a perspective and a doctrine that is very positive, or one that's very negative? And so we always have to kind of keep an eye out for that and make sure that hopefully most of the ideas or beliefs that we ourselves fall into are the ones that are more positive.
That's so interesting. That's very interesting. Dr. Newberg, we're going to give a very short break, but when we come back, we have already comments and questions from the listeners as we continue to understand more about the books you wrote, okay?
Thank you.
We will return to our program after these messages.
New release, Liberation. In this compelling narrative, Andre Louise emphasizes the work of high-order spirits in the effort to convert the spirit Gregorio to the good, an effort that culminates with the unforgettable re-encounter with his mother, herself a highly evolved spirit, wherein he surrenders to the irresistible call of love. The book also contains information on how unhappy spirits act as they try to involve incarnates in their wiles. The spirit author tells of the intercession of high-order spirits on behalf of human beings, demonstrating the divine compassion that grants to all the blessed opportunity to free themselves by means of study, labor, and persevering service in the practice of the good. Buy your copy today at www.ediceiofamerica.com.
Spread the word. Kardec Radio, to learn more about Spiritism.
Want Spiritus books for your children? At Edison of America, you will find a collection of them. From the best-selling book, Our Father, in which the spirit Mei through Chico Xavier brought countless poems, stories, and folk tales based on the Lord's Prayer, to the beautiful and educational collection by the author Adelison Sales on Back to School and many others. Buy your copy today at www.edisayofamerica.com.
Nourish your soul with Kardec Radio.
If you missed out on previous shows, no worries. We have an on-demand sections of all previous shows and interviews. Go to our website, www.kardecradio.com.
Nourish your soul with Kardec Radio.
Spiritism for Everyone is the live web study meeting and educational program of the United States Spiritist Council. This year, in commemoration of the 150th anniversary of the Gospel according to Spiritism, the Spiritism for Everyone program will present an in-depth study of this remarkable book. Join us every Wednesday evening through the web from any computer or mobile device, no matter where you are in the U.S. Spiritism for Everyone is free, open to all, and requires no registration. For more information, go to www.spiritist.us.
And now we return to our program.
Dear listener, we are here rejoiced by having a beautiful conversation and learning a lot from Dr. Newberg. He is the professor at Thomas Jefferson University and Hospital. He's director of the Research Marna Bryant Center of Integrative Medicine. He is the leading authority in this very field of research, neurotheology. It's a field of research that bridges our understanding of, and this is my take on it, our understanding of God's religiosity, spirituality, and how it impacts on the brain. Well, he has written many books. We're discussing, particularly in this first part, this book, How God Changes Your Brain. Breakthrough findings from a leading neuroscientist. And Dr. Newberg, when you talked about, this book is really fascinating, and all the books you write are, but this one is particularly very interesting because it gives us hands-on exercises. It talks about, in its second part, 8 best ways to exercise the brain. And can you tell us about these exercises and why you think they can be beneficial to those who are reading it?
Now, you're talking about like the different specific approaches that make the brain better? Is that you're talking about that section?
Mm-hmm, yes.
So, well, there's actually, as you mentioned, I mean, in our research, we have discovered that there are a variety of different things that do help to make our brain work better, and to the extent that any one person can begin to try to engage those practices or ideas, they can be very helpful to them. And some of them are kind of more obvious, and some of them are a little bit less obvious in the sense of things that we might think would be useful for the brain. So, for example, one of the things that we typically talk about as being something that is beneficial to the brain is when you simply is doing a practice like meditation, like some of the things that we had talked about. So these things can be very helpful. These types of practices can be very helpful in making your brain work better. I think one of the other things that we often talk about in terms of trying to improve your brain is just trying to have a positive outlook and smiling a lot. Interestingly enough, simply by bringing a smile to your face, it's actually something that can change the way your brain works. It actually changes the way other brains work around you. When somebody sees you smiling, then their brain smiles as well. And therefore you wind up having a very good interaction that helps to bring both your brain and another person's brain into some kind of nice connection, and that can be very beneficial for your overall emotional responses and for the way in which the brain actually works. I think to some degree one of the common elements to exercising your brain well is that the brain has so many different abilities. It has so many different things that it can do and that you can do. So the more you can engage all of those different aspects, and that's basically trying to stay intellectually active, the better off your brain will function. So, for example, doing puzzles, watching documentaries, talking with friends, talking with colleagues. All of these different things are great. Doing Bible studies. All of these different things are great ways of just exercising your brain, and it's good to do a diverse number of different things. So, if you really like crossword puzzles, that's great, but if you spend all your time doing crossword puzzles, you're going to get really good at doing crossword puzzles, but you may not necessarily be good at something else, or may not help you remember where your car keys are or something like that. Mm-hmm. So, trying to do things that engage all the different parts of the brain can be very, very valuable for people. It's also important for people to think about ways of consciously relaxing their brain. And that kind of gets back to the meditation piece a little bit, that, the more you can actually just kind of concentrate and relax, and whether it's, as we were talking about earlier in the show, 1 or 2 minutes at a time or an hour, whatever works best for a person, the ability to just kind of simply slow your brain down, slowly relax yourself, these can be very, very helpful ways of keeping your brain awake, alert, and healthful. One of the things that's interesting, and actually just right before we went on, I just saw this article about this. And this is one of the more obscure ideas that people don't always think about, but is yawning. And normally yawning is something that we think about in a very negative way because we usually yawn when we're getting bored. But the reason that we yawn is because it's a way of waking our brain up. It helps our brain work better, actually, and that's why we're actually doing it. And some people have advocated yawning purposely when you are about to do something, when you're about to go into a meeting or do something athletic. In fact, some of the Olympic athletes have been found to be yawning, and I think and it's also I think I may have heard you just yawn there. It's also something that is contagious and has a social piece to it. So it's a very powerful way, and one of the ways in which we think it works, and this is the article I just saw right before I came on the program, is that its main mechanism may be that it acts to help cool the brain down. And when you're using your brain, it's sort of like your car engine, and your brain literally overheats. It gets a lot of blood flow to it, and just like when you're using a muscle, your body or your muscles can overexert themselves. Well, the brain can do the same thing, and when you yawn, you bring a lot of air across your nose and mouth, which your big frontal lobe, which regulates a lot of the functions of your brain, sits right on top of that. So it may be a way of actually helping to cool the brain down so that it allows the brain to work that much more effectively.
That's interesting.
A few other things.
And as you're saying this, it reminds me of a statement that I read the other day. Emilio, through Chico Xavier, wrote in one of his books that one of the roles of the Spiritist teachings is to teach people how to discern and think. So basically exercise the brain. So you're saying whatever we can do to exercise the brain can be producing benefits, not only to the physical but also to the mental and spiritual health. Is that right?
Yes, absolutely. I mean, doing those kinds of practices and doing those kinds of exercises can all be beneficial to the brain in one form or another. And of course, again, the more different kinds of exercises you do, the better off your brain will function.
Because, for example, Dr. Newberg, you studied the mediums of the Spiritist mediums who came to your lab from Brazil together with Dr. Julio Perez. And in the Spiritist circles, we have this statement that, once you find out you're a medium, when you exercise mediumship, you are healthier and you're even, everything is better in your life. You're healthier not only physically, and people feel better once they found that practice really works for them. So would you say that fits in the very finding that you talk about as whatever practice, if it fits in for you, it's going to accommodate the changes that are beneficial to your brain?
Yeah, absolutely. And again, with the mediums in particular, that goes back to my other point about the idea that when you're doing a kind of practice and you have this program that is that you believe in very strongly, is a very important part of your life and creates your belief system for you, then it works even that much better. So I think that those kinds of practices do help to make people healthier. But again, there's still the other caveat that we talked about a little while ago, that it does depend, too, on what the goals of that practice are. And obviously, most people who are mediums look at the world and other people in a very positive way. At least that's been my experience. Most mediums are looking at ways of making the world better and connecting people to the spirit world and so forth. Those are good ideas. Those are generally beneficial ideas for people, which foster positive emotion. They're not trying to connect with the evil spirits or whatever, and that's not the goal, and that's not. You're not looking at ways of making people feel bad, or it doesn't make you angry or anything like that. So those kinds of positive beliefs do help to drive the brain in a much more beneficial way, and that's most likely why those kinds of practices and attitudes tend to be beneficial for people.
That's interesting. Dr. Newberg, we have here John DeRosa from Virginia. He is asking this very question. Is there a certain part of the brain that is highlighted when talking about God? And is there one for belief in the afterlife?
I don't think there's one particular God spot in the brain. I think that when you look at religious and spiritual ideas in a very global way, they are so rich and diverse for people and include emotions and ideas and thoughts and different concepts that many different parts of the brain become involved. In fact, what I've kind of come to learn in my research is that if there's a God spot of ourselves, it's the whole brain. I mean, it's really all the different parts, because it depends on how a particular individual decides to engage that part of themselves. And similarly, when you start thinking about the afterlife or the spirit world or whatever, there's no clear evidence that there's this one piece of the brain that suddenly lights up or acts differently when you're engaged in those kinds of ideas than when you are just engaged in kind of normal reality. In fact, several studies, and there's not a lot of these, but there are a few of them that have shown that when people engage their religious or spiritual self, especially when it's done in a way that's similar to the way we engage the rest of the world, that we use the same parts of our brain. An example is there was a study that was done looking at conversational prayer, where you're just speaking to God, and you activate the same areas of the brain when you speak to God as when you speak to another person. So for the individual who's doing that kind of practice, they really just look at God as another part of reality, as another person in their reality, and that's the way their brain reacts. So all of it kind of builds off of the ways in which our brain works, and at the moment, at least, we haven't found something that is more specific to our spiritual self. But we're still studying it, and there's still a lot for us to learn. And obviously, there is something that differentiates the spiritual from the non-spiritual. We tend to feel that things that are spiritual have greater meaning, more power. I think one of the big picture questions that we have is whether or not those ideas are just a kind of a further activation of the same brain areas, or whether there is some sort of leap that our brain makes to this other level that we begin to engage these topics. And one of my newest book that I just want to mention here,
sure.
that kind of addresses some of these topics in a more kind of academic way for the readers who are interested in trying to explore it more in more detail, is a book I wrote called The Metaphysical Mind. And in there, I'm really talking a lot about the ability of the brain to help us to engage these kind of metaphysical concepts, these ideas that we don't typically see in our everyday reality, and how does our brain allow us to do that, and how does our brain constrain us from doing that, so that we can do this, we can engage these kind of big metaphysical questions about the nature of reality and how reality works and whether there's a God or whether there's a spirit world or not. But also, there are certain limitations that our brain makes in terms of how we can ask those questions and how we can think about them. So there's a lot of really fascinating points that come up about how we do philosophy, how we do spirituality, how we do religion, And all of this, I think, is part of our metaphysical mind, and that's why I wrote this book, to explore those questions in more detail.
It's interesting you're mentioning this, Dr. Newberg, because I know it's a very controversial question at this point because probably science cannot address it very directly. But when you're talking about the metaphysical mind, the first question is, isn't that, if the brain can make us think this way, doesn't that tell us that the actual thinking being is not the brain, but an extracorporeal being?
Well, I mean, that's you hit one of the big questions. I mean, that if we can conceive of God, does that imply that God exists? Does that, if we conceive of a metaphysical realm, a supernatural realm, what does that mean in terms of the existence of that realm? And what do we even mean by existence? If God is purely a concept, but has such a huge impact on human history, then doesn't that still make it real? We have to. These are some of the big kind of questions that we have to start to think about how do we define our terms, how do we define spiritual, how do we define religiousness, how do we define God? When I go around and give talks so often, I ask people, what do you think about these? What do you think when I say God? We did a study in one of our books asking people to draw pictures of God, and it's fascinating what people draw when you start to ask them to do something like that, and how there's similarities and how there's differences in what people think about when they think about God. So, these are some of just the fundamental. We don't even understand what we all think about these ideas, let alone what they ultimately mean in terms of the nature of reality and our brain and the world around us. So a lot of really great ideas and issues and questions that hopefully all of us can continue to explore. And some of the work that I do, I think at least provides a little bit of a perspective on that, a perspective on how we might integrate our scientific pursuits and our spiritual pursuits, but then ultimately coming back to how we as human beings just experience and understand our world.
It's very intriguing, for sure, and this book really addresses this the very questions you were talking about. It's very philosophical, and I think it's going to serve a good purpose to the listener who is into that. The metaphysical mind, probing the biology of philosophical thought. Now, one final question that we have to ask you is about a very interesting exercise in your book, which talks about compassionate communication. And I say this because many listeners at Kardec Radio have, they have asked us, what can I do when I'm under conflict, when I have problems talking with my family members, etc. It's very interesting that the evidences on your research will lead us into this type of communication. What is that exactly that you propose on this compassionate communication?
Yes, well, actually, and this was actually for the readers who want to look at this, this was another book that we did very recently called Words Can Change Your Brain. And in that particular book, we talk a lot about compassionate communication. The idea of compassionate communication really grew out of our research, out of our understanding of the brain and how our brain communicates, and is really trying to help people to develop a kind of combination of communication with meditation, and also acknowledging some of the basic tenets of how we understand our brain working. So just to give you a couple of examples, part of what we do with people in compassionate communication is try to get them into a meditative type state in a very simplistic kind of way, but to help to maintain that throughout the entire period of the communication. So when they're talking to somebody, to keep coming back to a breath, to keep coming back to a more calm place, so that we don't become overreactive, that we don't become defensive, and we continue to just have a nice interaction with that individual. The other piece too, another very important piece that we mentioned, and there's several, but I'll just to keep us brief. One of the other things that's so essential in good communication is to be brief. When we think about how the brain works, the brain has something called working memory, which refers to the amount of information it can hold at any one time. All the data point to the idea that the brain can hold on to about 4 or 5 chunks of information at one time, which is basically about 30 seconds worth, maybe a minute worth. So if you get into a long discussion with a family member or a colleague, and you go on and on and on about your ideas or about what you're worried about or upset about, well, they're not listening. I mean, that's what the data shows. It's not that they're not trying to listen. It's just that their brain can only handle very, very brief amounts of information. So what we encourage people to do is to speak very briefly, to say, a couple of sentences, 2 or 3 sentences at most, and then pause. Go back to your breath and wait for the other person to respond. And in doing so, you're more clear, you're more concise, the other person is hearing you and can react to what you're saying and really take it in, and then it comes back to you and you go back and forth with this. And there are other elements as well that I think are important, but that just kind of gives you a little sense of how we utilize our information about the brain that helps us to communicate more effectively. And we've actually studied our compassionate communication program and shown that it actually really helps to create a sense of intimacy as well as a sense of compassion in people.
That's fascinating. And I think it's fascinating that the research is bringing so many practical tips for the day-to-day reader. So, Dr. Newberg, we are enjoying very much, but what would you share with us as your final comments about your latest findings in this very field of neurotheology?
Well, I think what we continue to learn is that our brain is basically built in such a way that enables us to have these kinds of powerful spiritual experiences that help us to think about our world in certain ways, and that the more we can look at this, the more we can study this and understand it, the better off we're going to be at helping ourselves and helping the people around us. And so for me, it's really a matter of continuing to build upon the research, continuing to build upon our own spiritual experiences and practices, and continuing to find a way to bring those two together to help better humanity and better ourselves.
Oh, that's wonderful. We thank you again and again, Dr. Newberg, for being with us at Kardec Radio today and for doing your wonderful work. We wish you the very best. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
So, dear listener, here we have it. Beautiful books. Go to the website, andrewnewberg.com. You're going to find great articles there. And not only that, but you're going to find the references for the very books we mentioned, from the principles of neurotheology to Words Can Change Your Brain, to how God changes your brain, and the metaphysical mind, probing the biology of philosophical thought. And why we believe what we believe, and why God won't go away, the mystical mind. So there is a really vast literature for you there, and for the different types of readers as well, from the ones that want to engage into the more scientific, philosophical aspect to the more practical day-to-day life as well. Lots of opportunities for us to read and to understand what's happening in this very field that is trying to understand how we think of life, how we understand reality as a whole. And it's happening, dear listeners, little by little. Science is getting there, and we just need to keep on working on it and keep on especially sharing. The more we share about these results, the faster we're going to have more and more results, because if people want more, we're going to help the government fund more, and funding more research on this. We have scientists like Dr. Newberg to lead this very field that can help us live better. Certainly we can live better when we get to know that when meditate, we can decrease our problems in anxiety and stress. When we get to know that cherishing a good perspective of life and also of God, a good loving God, the one that Jesus taught us, a loving Father, is certainly beneficial to us as well. It's amazing how scientific research is coming very close to what we have been learning in Spiritism in itself. No wonder Allan Kardec, in the Gospel According to Spiritism, 150 years ago, has said, the alliance between science and religion is of the essence for us to live a better life. And we can tell by the research of Dr. Newberg that this is very true. We're going to get to a very short break. When we come back, the last part of our program.
We will return to our program after these messages. Want to learn more about the ins and outs of mediumship? The book In the Realms of Mediumship by the spirit doctor Andre Luiz through the medium Chico Xavier analyzes the various aspects of mediumistic communication and mediumship. He also praises the efforts of mediums who are faithful to the spiritual mandate they received before they reincarnated, warning them about the risks of badly practiced exchanges between the two worlds. Buy your copy today at www.ediceiofamerica.com.
The Spiritist Magazine is a trimestral digital periodical that publishes the latest news on the Spiritist thought and the movement in the USA and worldwide at www.spiritistmagazine.com.
Spread the word. Kardec Radio, to learn more about Spiritism.
Study Spiritism online at eSpiritism. eSpiritism is an online tool to promote the study and practice of Spiritism while contributing to the preparation of Spiritist practitioners. For full access to courses, go to www.e-spiritism.org.
If you missed out on any previous shows, no worries. We have an on-demand section of all previous shows and interviews. Go to our website at www.kardecradio.com.
Emmanuel's Novels. The reputable mentor, Emmanuel, wrote a 5-book series of Spiritist novels that can truly transform your life. Starting with 2,000 Years Ago, Emmanuel delights our minds with the true account of characters that are so similar to each of us. Discover yourself in Emmanuel's novels and live better. Buy your copy today at www.ediceiofamerica.com. And now we return to our program.
Dear listener, we are here to talk about the very, very, very power of our minds to boost itself. When we talk about God, when we think about God, when we meditate, when we think about life as a whole. You know, as we talk to Dr. Newberg, in Spiritism we understand that it's very important to learn how to discern and to think. That's what Spiritism is here for, to help us polish those ways. And when we do so, we really become better, more fulfilled, enlightened. And we would like to thank you, Bernadette, for sharing your comments, and we're going to read it. She said she's so glad to hear that her brain is here to help her. She said, recently dealing with a very stressful situation that affected my body and breathing, I decided to meditate for 15 minutes with affirmation and breathing. Result, I fell asleep for 15 minutes, which felt like a 2-hour nap, and woke up energized, feeling peaceful and with intuition on how to handle the situation. Love it. Thank you so much, Bernadette, for sharing that experience that you had. And she also mentioned here about an interesting book on compassionate communication with students by Marshall Rosenberg. Thank you so much for that tip as well. So, dear listener, Dr. Newberg is the leading scientist in the very field of the relationship between the brain function and mental states, especially the pioneering studies on the neurological effects on religious and spiritual experiences, which is the field that he coined, neurotheology. Go to his website, andrewnewberg.com. Pray for him as well to help him keep on this beautiful research that is really going to change many things, the way we see and view ourselves in the near future. And you know, as I mentioned before at the very beginning of the program, Dr. Emma Bragdon was here on the program twice. She emailed us asking to share the very news that she's organizing another trip for healthcare providers to explore spiritist psychiatric hospitals and clinics in Brazil, which is going to happen on October 5th, the 5th to the 12th of this very year. It's for medical doctors and for healthcare practitioners in general. Her perspective is to share the beautiful approach that is happening in Brazil and how it can actually help people in the United States if we absorb the approach here as well, which is the Spiritist complementary approach on traditional medicine. It's really beautiful. Just go to her website, emmabragdon.com, and you'll get to know more information about the very trips to Brazil to visit these psychiatric hospitals and clinics. Right now, we want to remind you that the Spiritist magazine is here for you to enlighten your days. Go to thespiritistmagazine.com. We have a beautiful issue that talks about spiritual healing and much more, but mainly it's dedicated as a tribute to pioneering steps of Spiritism in the United States. Did you know you can print your very copy of the magazine? It's beautiful. It's HP Mag Cloud. The partnership with HP Mag Cloud is bringing to your very house the magazine. All you need to do is go to our website, thespiritistmagazine.com. There is an icon there on the top right saying order your copy here. Just go there, click, and you're going to receive the magazine at your door. But if you don't want to buy, you prefer the digital form, just click HP Mag Cloud as well, and you can read free of charge. If you want the PDF copy, we give it to you as well. Just go to our website, thespiritistmagazine.com. In the click of a button, boom, you can open your PDF and read the beautiful magazine. It's a beautiful, beautiful issue that we truly recommend to you. It's very, very inspiring. Right now, we are going to the final moments of our program. But before we go to the final moments, we're going to share a message with you to prepare for the final moments. Always in peace. Right after that, we'll talk to you.
Chapter 17. Always in Peace.
The violence that alarms mankind and bewilders the whole planet springs from the hidden aggressiveness within the hearts of people. It generates both instability and unhappiness. Any display of evil produces unexpected reactions that may lead to hopelessness and belligerence. Jesus advised, "Watch and pray that ye enter not into temptation." It was a warning to remind us to keep a balanced attitude and attend to our duties. Whatever the circumstances you might be struggling against, keep your peace. Be stern, but avoid rudeness. Enforce discipline, but avert violence. Promote education, but oppose aggressiveness. Whatever you do, do it peacefully. When mistreated or suffering, hold your peace at all costs, so that you may keep your tranquility. Jesus was always calm, ineffable, and serene, regardless of circumstances around him. Real peace is rooted in absolute confidence in God. Remain undisturbed, do all the good you can, and do not line up with those who complain, are violent, or unreasonable. Your peace reveals your life as much as the way you live affects the environment around you.
That's a beautiful message, and as Dr. Andrew Newberg said before, according to the studies, whatever we can do to exercise the brain to the positive, like listening such beautiful messages as this one, can help not only the physical health, but our emotional health and the spiritual health. That's why Spiritism offers a range of beautiful books for you, so you can really have a very healthy life. Now, we have a new friend from Kardec Radio, who is also Newberg, but not Dr. Newberg, as he said. He is here with us from New York. Hello, welcome to Kardec Radio.
Hello?
Yes, hi, we're listening to you.
Yeah,
you
but
said
I'm
you
not
had a
Dr.
question.
Newberg.
I know.
Yes, I am. I'm from Newberg, but I'm not Dr. Newberg.
That's great as well. So you said you had a question.
Yes. I see the book titled How God Changes Your Brain.
Yes.
Well, God just does it on his own through synchronicity, or do people have to do people trust God to do things for them? I mean, Who has precedence? God has precedence, or you have precedence?
I understand your question. It's a very fair question. I wish Dr. Newberg was still here with us to answer this question, but from our conversation and reading the book and being a scientist as well, what we can tell is that the way they phrased it is just to tell us how our spiritual and religious practices, which are related to God, change our physiology, our brain connection. So the more we think about God, how we cherish our relationship with God, will change the way our brain is connected and is also having its effect on our overall health. So here, as I asked him before, science is limited. They cannot tell whether or not, there is an extracorporeal being ruling the brain, etc. They are not going there yet, but they can tell for sure that whatever we do spiritually and religiously is impacting on our physical body for the better.
Well, there's a woman that sells a device. I think she calls it the Skinner device. I've never used it myself. They say you place that on it and it heals your problems now and diseases. Yeah, have you heard of such a thing?
No, sincerely not. What is the name again? Skinner?
Yeah, Skinner. S-C-E-N-A-R. S-C-E-N-A-R. All you have to do is type that in. It'll come in up on searches.
Okay.
The cosmonauts used it when they beat us in space. And that's what helped cure some problems when they were in space. So they've been bringing that technology out. Now, that doesn't sound like God to me. That sounds like man using technology, to do things like that. You know what I'm saying? Because, I've heard that God heals diseases and things like that. Well, here you have a man designing a device to do the same thing. It doesn't make sense. I mean, it sounds like people today are writing books because everybody else is. But if they already have devices here on Earth to do the same thing, why would you have to ask God to heal you?
Yeah, to tell you the truth, Mr. Newberg, I am not acquainted with the equipment you mentioned, but I would say that I find it very difficult to believe that a machine can do it all. And I would say science itself is proving to us day in, day out that the way we cherish our connection with God can be quite healing for us and very healthy as well. So we can be rest assured that cherishing our relationship with God is not a waste of time. It's very, very beneficial. And especially, they say, science has already proved to us that when we are infirm, those people who are religious, they recover much faster, or they go through the process in a much less complicated way than those who do not have any religious or spiritual practices. So for several reasons, science is showing to us that practicing religiosity, spirituality is beneficial. We would then conclude that, certainly God heals. It does heal. We just needed to, continue investigating to understand more and more about it. But I would like to thank you very much for coming to the program and being so kind to asking this question, sharing this thing that we're actually going to do our homework and investigate here. Thank you so much, Mr. Newberg.
Thank you.
Thank you. God bless you. And we hope to have you more often here, okay? All right, dear listeners, we have enjoyed this conversation. We love talking to you, and you see how we learn. Mr. Newberg was sharing something with us we never heard before. It's quite interesting, and it's an opportunity for us to learn about things that are happening out there and we are not acquainted with. And you can do the same by writing to us at cardiacradio.com. We have a contact form. We'll be happy to listen from you. By the way, we'd like to share with all of you, dear listeners, that we are reading your emails. We are reading everything that you share with us and also on Facebook. And we are getting back to you as soon as we can. And we'd like to thank everyone who supports Cardiac Radio, who is so kind to give us a very, very generous feedback. Remember, if you are willing to join the team, write to us at cardiacradio.com. We have an ongoing need of people to help because Cardiac Radio is expanding as we speak. We have listeners in much more than 61 countries around the world, and we are expanding our days and our programs, and we need more and more help. So if you want to help, just write to us at cardiacradio.com. We have a contact form, and we'll love to listen from you. For now, we'd like to invite you to pray with us. Prayer is a great way for us to achieve greater health. Spiritism explains, because we pray and we connect to higher forces, and we receive those loving vibrations. So right now, let us feel prayerful. Let us pray together. Dear Mother, Father God, in a world that convulses in need of healing, we gathered here together to pray for those who are in need of healing. May you use the co-creative power you have given us to multiply the resources of healing, especially to those who are suffering and have not found consolation. Give us the strength, dear Lord, to keep on marching our walk, being faithful and loyal to our commitment to you. It is wonderful to feel your love and your compassion, your kindness, and especially to be surrounded by your abundant love. Please bless our families. Bless all those whom we work with, not only at our professional site, but our spiritual practices, at our neighborhoods. May the whole world receive this shower of blessings that now pour onto us. May we feel the breeze of your caress touching us and replenishing our souls with new hope. And so be it. Dear listener, we thank you again and again for being with us, and we'd like to invite you for next week. As we're talking about meditation, we also have Spiritism to understand what meditation is all about. Brian Vosberg, a Spiritist speaker in New Jersey, comes to Kardec Radio to discuss a Spiritist view on meditation. It's very instructional, very uplifting, and the interview can be life-changing. It's quite interesting. We invite you to be here with us at Kardec Radio in 1 week. But don't forget, tomorrow at 8 p.m., Sunday Zone. At 8 p.m., we have Spiritist Awareness. Very different hosts are talking about different aspects of Spiritism and how you can change your life by engaging on it. Beautiful. And then on Wednesdays at 5 p.m., we have Got It Home, Thursday Spiritist Talks, and then in a week from today, beautiful interview with Brian Vosberg on the Spiritist view on meditation. For now, we wish you that you continue feeling the blessings of God wherever you are in the world. Keep thinking positive, saying positive things, doing positive things, and feeling positive as well. You're never gonna lose anything by being positive. After all, you're gonna be connected directly to the heart of God. Many blessings, and we'll talk to you in a week.